Welcome, bienvenidos to another episode celebrating Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. Today, I'm your host, Alexa, and you're listening to the Bloodstream Podcast. I'm just going to say it, and yes, I am a little biased, but today's episode is my favorite for the month of March. We'll be talking about the beautiful island of Puerto Rico, the hemophilia chapter that if you didn't know existed on the island, well, now you know. And our guest will explain what life is like for people living with bleeding disorders after the hurricanes and even more. Today, our guest is Anthony Llanes, the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Hemophilia Chapter, and we'll be talking all about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not only my favorite place on earth, it's also my home. And if you don't recall middle school history class, and it's fine if you don't, Puerto Rico is a commonwealth of the United States. In all honesty, no one really knows what it actually means. But in theory, it means that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And while Puerto Ricans cannot vote in presidential elections and have a vote-less representation in Congress, Puerto Ricans are born U.S. citizens. Raising awareness for the American citizens of Puerto Rico is dear to my heart. Often, Puerto Ricans are not included in conversations and are treated very poorly. Today's episode will give you a snapshot of Puerto Rico and the bleeding disorders community. We'll be back right after this quick break with Anthony Llanes. Today, I'm really excited because we have Anthony Llanes, the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico chapter, with us today. Welcome, Anthony.
Hello, Alexa. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. So let's get started. A lot of our listeners may not know that there is a chapter in Puerto Rico. But can you talk to me about what was the journey like to officially pronounce the Association of Puerto Rico as an official 501c3 and then later on a chapter of the hemophilia community?
Well, APH has been founded for 22 years, but on April 3, 2020 was the exact day that APH obtained the status of 501c3, and then months later became a chapter. It was a real challenge, a long and tedious process because there was a lot of missing puzzle pieces. It took me about 2 years to complete the whole process because there was no financial reports prepared. Neither did I have the bank statement. And sometimes there was a change of bank institution in the past, so we basically had data in one bank and the rest of the one in another one. I wasn't authorized to request that bank statement and that information, so I had to ask for authorization. We had to pay taxes to find and identify a CPA who wanted to work with the case, and was a long road. But once in the middle in the pandemic, we received the Pfizer 1C3. We affiliate with national organizations, and finally, during March 2020, we became a chapter officially.
That is so impressive. All of that during a pandemic. That is quite remarkable. And as we're talking about, not so happy and positive things, Puerto Rico really made the headlines during 2017 because of the devastating hurricanes that touched the island, both Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the hurricanes and the aftermath of the hurricanes affected the lives of people living with bleeding disorders in Puerto Rico?
Well, I think we can all agree that there's a before Maria and after Maria for Puerto Ricans. Nothing was ever the way it used to be. Hurricane Maria left a trauma and mark on everyone's life. Back then, the whole island was out of power. So our patient was in need. There was no electricity or power to keep their medications refrigerated. The roads were obstructed. There was closed roads. There was no access to the highways and main avenues of the country. Um, so in case of an emergency, our families could not reach an emergency room or at the HTC. Um, these were uncertain times. There was no communications. When the communications began to restore, like almost a month after, I was able to establish communication with people from the community of bleeding disorders in the United States, who in their concern were interested in helping, but they didn't know how to do it. So basically, they traveled to Puerto Rico, and a group of volunteers took the street without communication, without signal. We were only have a patient record that wasn't updated by that time, and in rented cars, we tried to impact the community, and some days we have success. In other cases, not, because the road was closed, so we have to go back. And basically, I think that that exercise helped us to all understand the true meaning of our organization,
Mm,
uh, like that, like to
yeah.
serve as a support network. I think that by that time, APH was like the resurface, because as a resilient community that we are, since that moment, all eyes have been in Puerto Rico. For us, our organization, we begin to receive help, establish collaborations, networking, and guiding in the process. So basically, at the beginning of 2000, that was on 2017. On 2018, a new board of directors composed of young patients with bleeding disorders, with all bleeding disorders, and caregivers was elected. And since that moment, APH has not stopped working, and in volunteers and people joining and people committed to taking the organization to another level. I started as a board president. I spent almost 2 years and a half as a board president, and now I'm the executive director of APH.
And we Puerto Ricans with bleeding disorders could not be more proud to call you the executive director. You've done so much work for the community. It's something that really comes from your heart. It's always been so genuine. So thank you for everything that you have done to get the chapter to where it's at today. I love that you brought up how resilient the people are, because sometimes I feel like when we talk about Puerto Ricans and the hurricane, we tend to focus again on the negative. But so the people of Puerto Rico are so strong and so resilient that they came out of that and came out even stronger. Um, so so now we're in 2021. There's a global pandemic going on. Puerto Rico experienced the hurricanes, and then experienced a lot of earthquakes, and now the pandemic, just like the rest of the world. What is APH, the chapter in Puerto Rico, doing to support the community with bleeding disorders?
As you mentioned, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. And even though APH continue and remains committed to continuing to educate our community virtually, because this is the way that everyone has to do it right now. But we didn't have a problem adapting to the situation, so we changed all our programming to virtual, and we continue educating remotely, virtually, to empower our community and for them to advocate for better medical services, treatments, and a better quality of life. Basically, we offer virtual educational programs monthly, educational events such as annual meetings, summer camp, Christmas event that are the most frequented by our families. We have a emergency assistance program that it was established during the pandemic too, because we obtain the funds, and we develop it. So we have helped our community during the pandemic with rent, bills, utilities, back to school expenses, medical equipment such as crutches, canes, helmets, during hospitalizations, with transportation, etc. And we started a pilot program for advocacy workshop for teenagers. So we have 10 wonderful young people, patients of all bleeding disorders who have a lot of potential, and we are helping them to develop as leaders in our community. So basically, our work haven't stopped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really incredible. Anthony, I would love our listeners and followers to connect with you, to connect with the people of Puerto Rico and the chapter. Is there any way that people can donate or stay connected with you and the rest of the Puerto Rican chapter?
Of course. Basically, to learn more about APH, you can follow us on our social media, Facebook and Instagram, like Asociación Puertorriqueña de Hemophilia, or visiting our website, www.hemophilia.aph. So people can donate through PayPal on the website. And also during the next month, we will have our first sale, t-shirt sale, that will be available during the months of March and April. That everyone know that is like the bleeding disorders month and the hemophilia world day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Gracias un millón, Anthony, for your time and for sharing with us what the chapter is doing and for raising awareness for the people of Puerto Rico. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Sumamente agradecido con la oportunidad.
Gracias, Anthony, for being with us. The Bloodstream team for your work on this series. Thank you all for listening, and thanks to Keita for being the presenting sponsor of the Bloodstream podcast. Check out bleedingdisorders.com to learn more. That is all for this episode. Eso es todo. Ya no más. Circle back to hear all the episodes celebrating Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month, and find Bloodstream Media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreammedia.com, where you'll find links and information related to the stories and segments featured on this episode.